Even though in earlier generations, Seides HaTeira was for Yechidei Skula, and it was Behechove, it was a secret. No one was allowed to know about it, v'chuli, v'chuli, v'chuli. But as they get closer and closer to Mashiach Tzidkenu, so it becomes a muteru mitzvah, it becomes a big thing to Megala Zeisach. I just want to mention today, that one of the inyanim that's so important in the 9 days is the inyan of Yahavta Lecha Kamecha, to talk about Ahavas Yisroel. Yahavta Lecha Kamecha, Ahavas Yisroel, to talk about Ahavas Yisroel. And like the Rebbe brings in so many Sichas, the idea that Mipnei Chata'enu Golina Me'atzenu, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Chata'enu, because of our Avedas. Now, even though in so many other places in Hasidus it's pointed out that it's impossible to say that the only reason we wanted to go is as a oynish, as a punishment. You have to say Yerida Zu Tzeirach Aliyah, that the Golus is not just that we should do tshuva for our Vedas and go back to the Maimedu Matzav that we were in Zman Abayis, but there has to be an Aliyah. So the Churban and the Golus is considered an act of Ahava, like it says in Medrash, and is brought in Sichas and in Chasidus. At the same time, even though for sure that the inyan of Gula Amitis Vashlema is going to be Veistach Oidcha Adeshem Ki Anafta Bi, when Mashiach comes, we're going to thank Hashem for the Tzaras Necheshach HaGolus because of the Aliyah which we're going to have. Nevertheless, it is true that since it says in the Siddur, the Rebbe says you have to repair the Siba, and that repairs the Mesubav. The Siba is the opposite of Avas Chinam, the from Sinas Chinam. And B'meila, the tikkun for this is V'yahavta lecha kamoicha. Poshet libab matzveiten Yidden, was merer and was breiter, and Ahavas Yisroel B'chlal, I always say, and I know this from my own self, that Bein Adam Lachavere is harder than Bein Adam Lamokah. To be frum with the Eibishter about Kashrus and about Shabbos and about all the other inyanim, to be frum in our relationships with other people, especially people close to us, our parents, our siblings, and in some cases our children, and the people closest to us at work and in our shul. The fact of life is that it's jealousy and politics and petty differences tend to make divisions between people who are otherwise very close. And V'yahavta lecha kamoicha means to figure out how to not get caught up on those petty differences. I always give the dugma of Kibbud Aveim. Kibbud Aveim is the mitzvah in Torah that makes the most sense. I don't think there's a mitzvah in Torah that's more seichelic than Kibbud Aveim. And it may be the hardest mitzvah to keep. Mamish. Maybe the hardest mitzvah in the whole Torah is Kabbalah Zevicha V'Simecha. Why? Because it's so emotional. It's not an act. It's a shtickle hatz. And that's the reason it says in Chazal that Im Kesef Talva es Ami es Ha'ani Imoch, that tzedakah has to be to Aniyah Yircha Koidman. Who do you have to give tzedakah to first? Your husband, your wife, your father, your mother, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, your neighbor. Because when you give tzedakah to a stranger, you're writing a check. When you give tzedakah to people you're close to, especially you have cheshbonis, that he should be making money on his own and he's a battler, or he owes you money from last month, or well, I don't like him for this reason or this reason. And when farkukt, we get past all of these cheshbonos and we do on the we're not giving him a piece of money, a dollar, we're giving him a piece of self. And that's the real inyan of Ahavas Yisroel. Ahavas Yisroel means to be able to give not just from ourselves, but ourselves. Now, in other words, my money, which is nice to help people with money or with food or whatever the Eibush has given us, that we're able to give to others, is a moed in the kaschus, and it's a big mitzvah. But the inyan of Ahavas Yisroel is to give a piece of our heart, a shtickle Yiddish heart, to communicate that, to give of ourselves to another. That's the real inyan. That's the real inyan of Yahavta lecha kamoicha, and it's the real inyan of the 9 days. So I'm mentioning it, and I'm going to say two things. Number one, it's loy berdi. It's by no means a coincidence that Aaron Akein's yortzeit is Reish Chodesh Menachem. Right? I'm sure you know this. The only yortzeit written explicitly in the Chumash is Aaron Akein's. It doesn't say in the Chumash what day Moshe Avraham Avinu passed away. It doesn't say in the Chumash what day Yisrael Yemenu passed away. Even though we know from my mother Chazal Doesn't say in Chumash what the Yitzchak passed away. Doesn't say in Chumash what the Rivka passed away. Doesn't say in the Chumash what the Yankee passed away. Rachel, Leah, none. Doesn't even say in the Chumash what day Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. We have a whole cheshbon how we know when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. The only yortzeit that says explicitly, befedish in the Chumash, that B'chedesh HaChamishi Be'echad LaChedesh is the Estalkus of Aaron HaKohen. And where is it written? It's not written in Parshas Chukas, which tells the story of Aaron HaKohen's passing. It's written in Parshas Masei, amongst the Masais. Why? Because Parshas Masei is right before Reish Chodesh Menachem. Parshas Dvorim is always the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av or the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av. Shabbos Chazein. So Masei is either Shabbos Mavarchim or it's Reish Chodesh. I don't know if it could be Reish Chodesh, but I didn't do the math. No, it can't be Reish Chodesh, because if Shabbos is Aleph, then Ches, yeah, it could be Reish Chodesh. If Shabbos is Aleph, then Ches is Aleph, and Tes will be Sunday. Yeah, it could be. So, or it's the first Shabbos of Chodesh Menachem. So in Parshas Masei, which always falls in the 3 weeks, you say V'yomas Shomaran. Aaron passes away, there's Chodesh Menachem of, because his inyan is Oyev Shalom, Bereidev Shalom, Eyev Asabriyas, Makarbon Latera. The whole inyan of Aaron HaKohen is V'yahavt Larecha Kamoich. And like it says in Chazal, Mutter L'Shandes L'Pnei Darkei Shalom. Aaron used to not say the whole truth. He would meet a chosen, he would meet a kala, he'd meet a mister, he'd meet a missus. He wouldn't say lies. But he didn't say the truth. Laseth Shalom ben Ishli Ishtei ben Chaver lechaverta, Chaver chavere, chaverta, chavera lechaverta, and so on. Aaron HaKohen's name was V'ahavta L'Recha Kamoich. Like it says in the Chumash, when he passes away, everybody cried. Kol Beis Yisroel. When Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, the Talmidei Chachamim cried, because they understood his Torah. When Aaron HaKohen passed away, everybody cried, because everybody understood his Ahavas Yisroel. So the Chodesh Menachem is the Yortzeit of Aaron HaKohen, because the inyan of Rosh, you all know the word that says in Chassidus Benegeh to Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh doesn't mean the beginning, it means the head. Kol in Yonei HaChodesh are in Rosh Chodesh. So Rosh Chodesh Menachem of, what's the inyan? V'yahavta L'Recha Kamoich. Because it's the tikkun for Tisha B'Av. And it's the basis for the building of the third Beis HaMikdash. Like it says in Sfarim, that Tisha B'Av is the birthday of Mashiach. On Tisha B'Av you don't say Tachanun. Tisha B'Av you don't say Tachanun, because Tisha B'Av is called a Mayit, a Yom Tiv. What's the Yom Tiv of Tisha B'Av? It says in Medrashim that it's the Leida of Mashiach. That's why Tisha B'Av in the afternoon, in addition to saying Aneinu, we say Nachem. Aneinu has to do with the fast. Nachem has to do with the Nechama, with the consolation, with the Iyan Abiyas HaMashiach. Because Tisha B'Av is the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, let's take it a step further. Because the Inyan of Mashiach is, will be and is, the Inyan of Mashiach is that it'll be revealed that even greater than Torah is the Maila of a Yid. I'm sure you've heard this before. That the Medrash Rabbah, Medrash Tanvel Eliyahu Rabbah, and then Eliyahu Navi. The Eliyahu Navi asks a question. We know that the two most important things are Beis Reishis, Torah and Yisroel. Right? Beis Reishis. Bereishis is 2 words, Beis Reishis. And Rashi says in Chumash, Beis Reishis, the 2 things that are called Reishis. The Torah is called Reishis, and Yidna called Reishis. Kedesh Yisrael Havaya Reishis. Tv'asei V'ya Reishis Loi. 2 psukim where you see the Torah is called Reishis, and Yisrael are called Reishis. So Eliyahu Navi says, if there's 2 things that come before everything else, and they're both called Reishis, Torah and Shama, they have a new question. Amongst these 2, which one is first? And Eliyahu Navi answers, Oimer Ani, and there's a whole diak in the Sichas. Oimer Ani, Ich zog Eliyahu Hanavi, who's both a malach and a mensch, has both milas. Machshavt Anshe Yisrael Kodma L'chol David, that the Yidden are high even than the Torah. And that's going to be what Chassidus teaches, and that's Torah Shel Mashiach. So since Tisha B'Av is connected to Ahavas Yisroel, and connected to Mashiach, Reish Chodesh Menachem is the Yortzeit of Aaron HaKohen, because his whole lineage is in Ahavas Yisroel. And I want to add, we talked yesterday about Arizal. The name of Arizal was Pnimius HaTorah. And L'cheira, Pnimius HaTorah is exclusive, right? Arizal didn't have, a following like the Baal Shem Tov. Arizal was involved, the Haifa Yidden. But we know from B'Shim B'Yechoy as well, that the whole lineage of Pnimius HaTorah is Simcha and Shalom. He said to make Shalom. Torah is called Shalom. Pnimius Torah is for sure called Shalom. The Rebbe brought that down. B'Shim B'Yechoy came out of the cave. What was the first thing that he said? Is there anything in the world that needs to be corrected? I will correct it. Is anything in the world that needs to be fixed? I will fix it. So the Rebbe explained that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai comes out of the cave. The highest and the holiest levels. What does he talk about? How we can help another Jew. And what kind of Jew and what kind of thing, what does the need for correction. So Arizal's yard site is Chamisha. Yom HaChamishi b'chodesh HaChamishi. It's the 5th day of the 5th month. And if you wanted to be a mystic, you would say that's a connected to Yechida, right? But Yom HaChamishi b'chodesh HaChamishi. You have in Tanakh. Yom HaChamishi b'chodesh HaRevi, when they get to the Merkavas Yechaskel. But this is the 5th day of the 5th month. This is Yechida within Yechida. That's the Stalkos and the Yard of the Arizal. And it's connected to the Ahavas Yisroel, V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. And then now you talk all the philosophy, and it's wonderful, and everybody enjoys it, including me. And then you say, so what am I going to do about it? And the Teretz says, I'm going to focus on one person whom I have a compromised relationship with, and I'm going to work on correcting it. And the beginning of correcting it is the ability to say, I'm sorry. The being corrected is to overlook another person's fault. The beginning of correcting it is to be the one who makes the compromise even when you're right and the other person is wrong. There's a Yid who's now in Elam HaEmes. His name is Goldschmidt. He married a Weinberg. Rabbi Weinberg had a niece. Rabbi Yisroel Weinberg, Alav Hashem, had a niece who came out of the Holocaust as a teenager with nothing in the world. Not a father, not a mother, not a brother, not a sister. Eled, Alain, alone. But she had an uncle. Rabbi Weinberg was her father's younger brother. So Rabbi Weinberg, Baruch Hashem, had a house, he had a wife, or an apartment, and he had children. So she became a part of their family. She didn't come from a Lubavitcher background. Rabbi Weinberg didn't come from a Lubavitcher background. But obviously, under those conditions, she had a connection to Lubavitch, and she courted and she dated a boy named Goldschmidt. He had a butcher shop here. He was a Baruch and Kent Lenin. You see films of him in the Gem, in the Living Torah, where they interviewed him. He's since passed away. He got married in 1951. That means he got married 70 years ago. Goldschmidt. So he tells the following story, that he came from Spitz Chabad. His father was a big chassid. His father was killed in Prois of Chevron in 1929. He was a Yosem. He lost his father, was a baby. They hid him in a closet. He was the one who was hidden in the closet that the Arabs didn't find. 22 years later, he got married. He was here in 770. And he dated, he said she was a Yosem and she was a Yosem, and they made a shidduch. And he talked to her about a sheitel. And she said, none of the girls wore sheitlach. I'm going to cover my hair. But none of the girls wore sheitlach. Sheitlach was for old ladies. They wore tichlach, they wore hats. And the Rebbe said that if you want that he should be Mesad the Kedushin, he should officiate at the wedding. So there has to be two conditions. The Rebbe didn't ask for a kapota. He didn't even ask for a garshel. He asked for a beard. From the boys he wanted a full beard, and for the girls he wanted a sheitel. Those were the two conditions. A board with a sheitel, then the Rebbe would agree to be Mesad the Kedushin. So he talked to her about it, and she says, I'm not wearing a sheitel. He was very upset. The Rebbe was his father. He didn't remember his father. And he was very upset. So after the date, he told Rabbi Weinberg, I don't know what I'm going to do. Rabbi Weinberg tried to talk to her, and she became very upset. She says, I'm a Yosem, nobody wants to marry me, and he's not going to marry either, even though he's also a Yosem, because I don't want to wear a sheitel. So he went into the Rebbe. In those days, between every date, the Bachrim went into the Rebbe. Can you imagine? Every Rebbe was like their shidduch coach. And he told the Rebbe that she doesn't want to wear a sheitel. So the Rebbe said, V'osim even Ahavas Yisroel. V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha is not only to strangers, it's to the person you're going to marry as well. The Rebbe didn't say he should marry her. The Rebbe didn't say he shouldn't marry her. But the Rebbe said you have to have Ahavas Yisroel to your prospective wife. Not just before she's your wife, but after she's your wife. And not just the first year, but 30 years later. He never thought of it in those terms. Anyway, they went out again. Rabbi Weinberg tried to talk to her. She was so upset she couldn't even converse. He went over to the house. In those days, they dated in the house. Nebuch normal, yeah, weird, Baruch Hashem, enlightened. So we date in such strange places as airports and hotel lobbies. But those days they had seichel. The seichel was much more important than chas v'shalom somebody should see me. And she was very upset. And she says, I'm alone in the world, and I met you, and I like you, and you're not going to marry me because I don't want to wear a sheitel. So he says, no. It says in the Torah, V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha is not only for strangers, it's for the person you're going to marry as well. I'll marry you even if you're not going to wear a sheitel. So she says, really? You told me you wanted the Rebbe to Mesad the Kedushin? He says, yes, I would like the Mesad the Kedushin. But V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha doesn't only apply to strangers, it applies to my prospective kala. See, she was so moved by it. She told him, you know what, you're going to marry me without a sheitel? I'm going to put on a sheitel. And that's the end of the story. There's pictures of the Rebbe at their Kabbalas Ponim and at their chuppah, one of the first weddings the Rebbe officiated at. But that was the story. The Rebbe just gave him simple advice. Tell her that you care about her, and her feelings matter. So if her feelings matter, then his feelings matter also. But we get stuck. As I tell them, we get stuck. So many interpersonal relationships are compromised by mistrust and by refusal to forgive and by refusal to be the first one to make the mizach, to put the right foot forward. And the end of this time of year is Ahavas Yisroel. Anyway, I'm talking away my few minutes that I have. Let's see if we can learn a little bit of Sicha. Yeah, yesterday I didn't teach you a word. Today I'm not teaching you a word. Let's go. The Rebbe is talking about Hafetz Mayonis, spreading Chasidus. And he already mentioned the idea of building buildings. But even though, the Rebbe told once Berel Baumgarten, I don't need buildings, I need people. I'm not concerned with buildings, I'm concerned with souls. But at the same time, the Rebbe says you have to make ufaratzta, hafotza. You don't make hafotza if the address is a post office box. You have to have an address where people could come. And the Rebbe then, in 1960, which is 60 years ago, is talking about the need of building buildings and of the tzimtzum kipshuta, the lack of people to be able to build. The Rebbe says some places they taka built, one place they broke ground, another place they're talking about breaking ground. And the Rebbe is lamenting the hesitation, the oisgeschlepptkeit. So on page 210. No, 211. Bottom of the page, Chavtes. V'lachein, page 211, bottom of the page. V'lachein yashla habiyah yashikeach. I want to put forth a thank you. B'negei lebeis mekemes. Now in the two places that I mentioned earlier, there's no names here. Shebehem bo habinyan l'idei peil mamish, where they actually built a building. And the Rebbe continues, and people should learn from this example that Lubavitch doesn't have to be tzimtzum. There's a lot to be Archov and Breitkeit. Today, Lubavitch is in a very different Maimed Matzav, not just in buildings, but in the brain, in the mentality. B'chalal European Jews, particularly Russian Jews, were so mitzumtzum. I told this to you last week, that the building of 770 was built by a Hungarian Jew, whose name was Klein. He loved the Rebbe Avatzmis. And he said, I'm going to build 770 because the Russians have brains that are so shrunken, they can't think beyond the shell around the pea. And he built 770. He built the first shul, he built the second shul, he built the third shul. Not just upstairs, downstairs. First they built here a shul, then they built the first apartment building, and they built the second apartment. And the Rebbe continues, Kam New York, including here. Shasev kol saves almost a chapetzim seichel. Finally, people should chapetzim seichel. 212. Should be a binyan, should be a house, a shul. Be'efin the harche picha v'amaleo, it should be breit. Mit a fanem. Hein beis ha'knesses letfilo, it should be a place for davening. Ve'hein mokum l'riches esvadas, place for brengens. Because what used to happen was they davened in what's called the shalash. The shalash was an outdoor sukkah with a tarp. It was freezing in the wintertime. It was boiling in the summertime. And the Rebbe davened, the Rebbe verbrengt there. The big wintertime verbrengens, they would rent a hall. So the Rebbe says, and we won't have to go into Golos anymore. And to rent a place. They used to rent halls around Crown Heights where they had the heat, pashut. And they used to schlep the benches from 770, bring them into these halls. When they finished with the hall said, never come back again. Because you understand yourself how those halls were. Halls were made for classy affairs. A Fabrengen is a very classy affair, but it's not a neat and controlled affair. And the Rebbe called it uprichten Golos. The Rebbe called going to the hall going into Golos. It may be true that halachically, when you rent a space, during the period of time that you're renting it, even if it's for a few hours, it's halachically yours. You can't compare that. When the Eged Adal in own 4 cubits. Ve'ein laharech, says the Rebbe, no need to explain at length something which is so plain and obvious, but davar amav, something which is shocking. Leirak davar ametzar, it's not just painful, but bebahala havahala gedei lebiyes, it's bewildering and overwhelming. My father, Zol Gezunzain, remembers those days. 770 was a disaster, begashmias. The Fabrengens took place in a driveway that had a tarp on top of it, full of holes. Now there was a drain. There was a drain in this driveway where the water was supposed to go down. But the drain was always stuffed with paper cups and this and that. Sometimes there could be a Fabrengen and there were 6 inches of water on the ground. just sitting there. And you stood in the freezing cold for hours in water. Some people they put boards and they try to stand on top of the water. Sometimes they had to place a platform that the Rebbe should be able to get to his place without walking into a puddle. Inside what was called a shul. And nobody had the break guy to figure out how to make it better. It doesn't take rocket science. It takes a little thinking that maybe there's a way to do this. It stayed that way for 10 years. For 10 years. It wasn't until 1960 they began to build a shul. And the Rebbe says it's beyond words how frustrating, how upsetting this is. After 20 years. 15 years. And 20 years. Hine. Bekfar Chabad, in Kfar Chabad, which was then about 10 years old. Yesh Mokim Larach Esfadus, Alver Chamesh Tlafn Yud. In Kfar Chabad, you can make a Fabring and have 5,000 people in one room. What's the name of that shul? No, Beis Menachem was built later. That was the old shul. Huh? Merkazi, the central shul. Ve'ilu b'mokim shebei haya kvei kedushas meini v'cham me'adbor meshach hasashanim. The place of the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he was there with Mesiras Nefesh. Or Masa Nefesh v'chol. Hini kasheni teisav yetzav mism mesuyim. If you have more than a certain number of people, Oza yesh tzedach b'Mesiras Nefesh. You have to have Mesiras Nefesh. Leisreitzitz b'rechevis ha'ir. Leisreitzitz means to get involved in an argument in the streets. Ulachapesh, and to find a nimtz in nimtin limtzei mokim, if you can find a place shabo yaskimu lerachim, that they'll agree to have rachmanis, because the halls didn't like 770 because they did more damage than the cost, than the profit. Ulahachnes Yehudim, to bring together Jews. Kidei leimed b'fnei piskom, to say before them a phrase shel haRebbe v'hayrosh alei, the Rebbe in his lessons. So the Rebbe says, beautiful the shir. It says that Tzimtzum has to end. It's about the past. Let's talk about the future. That 770 should learn from the two places in the world where they built the building, and other places in the world should take an example from the same, and Lubavitch should go out of its tzimtzum. Rabbi Tanabam al-Shalom told me that the famous Fabrengen, I think it was Yutas Kisatosh Yutes, where the Rebbe said the famous quote, Yid avai drosha, Yid, give grosha. The Rebbe made a fundraiser for, I think it was for Shikha Chabad in Yerushalayim. I could be wrong. Or I think so. Maybe it was for Beis Chabad Sheni, but I think it was Shikha Chabad in Yerushalayim. And the Rebbe said he's going to make a Yetzim and a Klal. Everybody should make a pledge, write on a paper how much they're giving, and the Rebbe is going to tell them how much to give without anybody knowing how much they're giving. So everybody wrote down an amount, and the Rebbe read their names out loud and said, give twice as much, give 10 times as much, give 3 times as much, give half a time more as much. People, and Rabbi Tenenbaum told me that Fabrengen, where the Rebbe told people to double and triple and quadruple their gifts, had that eingebracht Breket in Lubavitch, because there was such symptom before, the mentality was so stuck. Here's another case where the Rebbe is frustrated by the lack of Breitkeit. And all the explanations that everybody thinks it's not his business, there'll be plenty of somebody else's business. This whole business of excuses. There was reasons why the Beis Mikdash was destroyed. And over there it also says, you don't say it's not my fault, it's not my job, if you didn't fix it, then you're shaykhs to the breaking. And the Rebbe says, okay, I'm sorry that I spent so much time with the introduction.